I just came back from the Sundance Film Festival, and I mentioned to someone at the Black House. There's a new house that St. Clair Bourne would have actually loved, and Sundance is called the Black House. It's the second year of it's running, and I mentioned to him that St. Clair Bourne was my mentor. And then there were a chorus of people who said, well, he was my mentor too. He was my mentor too. Anthony Jamerson, he said he was his mentor as well. Yvonne Welbin said one of the great things about St. Clair was he is a mentor to so many of us. We all felt like we had a personal, intimate, creative, and business relationship with him. I mean, he tutored us. He told us how to survive in this business of making documentary films with nothing. And, so he gave me permission to be who I was filmically. But, right after that, St. Clair Bourne took me into his office and began teaching me the business of filmmaking. He showed me this program called Now Contact and told me how important it was to maintain one's contact base, to let people know what you're doing, give a context for what you're doing, why you're doing, basically educating people on the type of filmmaking you're engaged in, especially if you're engaged in creative processes of interpreting film and narrative. I went out right after that and I actually bought a copy of Now Contact. And, and I started that immediately. And what was interesting about that, in light of what's happening right now in terms of social networking, is that that's what St. Clair was engaged in. All this talk about, MyFace and Facebook, St. Clair was actually engaged in that in the early 90s, and it was a part of who he was in terms of his community building. When you were in St. Clair Bourne's presence, you felt protected, you felt nurtured, you felt like protecting him. I mean, not only was he directly involved in my work, but for me, he was a model. He was a Renaissance man. His ability to be many things at once: activist, journalist, photographer, writer, producer, mentor, student of life. But he was also a fierce warrior. And when we were negotiating a contract with one of the funders, he got into a fight with a guy, and I was like, this is the funder's sake, and he actually caused the guy to back up and to redo our contract. And so, it was, he was an indomitable spirit. But at the same time, St. Clair Bourne had this purity of heart that made it was like he approached his projects, he approached everything as if he was discovering it for the first time. Just this past year, St. Clair Bourne was honored by the Pan-African Film Festival in Los Angeles and also by the Pan-African Film Festival in Ghana. And he called me up and he said, hey man, that they're honoring me. And I'm like, you are St. Clair Bourne. But he was humble. And it wasn't, he didn't have this sense of entitlement as much as a sense of generosity of spirit and of discovery. And, as a filmmaker, I try to hold that, dear to me because, there's so much in this business which is ego-driven, which is isolating, which is competitive. And to have someone to give you the model that, that to make change, the only way to make change is as a group. We cannot make change by being, the only one up here, And so that was part of St. Clair Bourne. That was actually, it was St. Clair Bourne. It was in his heart.